what you had originally prepared and given to Mr. Wise, or Reverend Wise?
Well, now, you assuming that they prepared a manuscript and gave it to Wise?
Yeah,
And then got back a manuscript?
At some point, I'm assuming that their work product was turned into a manuscript of some sort, and that Mr. Wise worked with it in some way.
Well, I'm not sure that's right.
All right,
I mean,
well, then
it may have been given to him piecemeal, Darnay. I think you need to figure that out first.
I'll withdraw that question and ask you very simply whether, explain exactly how you worked with Reverend Wise on writing the book.
Well, he would sit and we would talk, and I had some things that I had written. Sometimes he would ask questions about things. You know, it was kind of a back and forth. Sometimes he would take something I had written and edit, and then, I mean, it was kind of an evolving process.
Did he use a tape recorder to take any of the things that you were saying?
I believe so, yes.
Did you give him written notes to look at? Were you shown a copy of the what we would call the rough draft of the book before it was sent to the publisher?
There were many drafts, yes, that we would keep reviewing.
Who would prepare the drafts?
A typist, I think, or the editor, perhaps. She kept a main manuscript going.
In main file?
I'm not sure how she did it, but she would keep it.
Were you given an opportunity to review the final manuscript before it was sent to the publisher?
I believe so. I believe so.
Do you remember reviewing?
Not specifically. I mean, there were so many iterations, I can't remember exactly which.
When was the first time you had an opportunity to read the book from beginning to end, as it was published?
After it was published?
In the form in which it was published.
Like the galleys?
It could have been a galley. I don't know what point.
You mean the hardback book?
Yeah, the hardback book.
Probably when it was completely published in March.
So did you see anything that looked like what they call galleys?
I don't think I saw galleys.
So the first time you actually were able to read the book then is when it appeared in hardcover, in the actually bound hardcover edition?
Well, I mean, I read the manuscript. I don't know if you call that the book.
So there was a manuscript, a completed manuscript that you were able to read before you before it was sent to the printer. Is that correct?
I believe so.
And did you review it?
I believe I did.
And did you look at portions of it in terms of statements that were accurate or not accurate?
Well, I primarily, the way the book is written, I speak, John speaks, I speak, John speaks, and I was mainly concentrated on what I had put in the book.
Do you remember in the book whether or not there is a theory of the crime that was, as you believed it may have been committed, talked about in the book, written about?
I'm not sure.
Well, the book contains a theory of the crime. Do you remember what the theory of the crime was in the book?
I'm not sure what you're talking about in the book. So,
Well,
I mean,
I mean, the whole book is...
there may be a number of different theories that are discussed in whole or
Well, I
part.
just want to see what she remembers.
But we're not here to engage in a memory contest about what is or is not in the book. If you have a question about something that is in the book, I think fairly you're required to put it in front of her, give her the opportunity to look at it, put it into context, and then respond to your question. So if there is something in the book, be it theory or whatever, show her what you want her to look at. She'll be glad to answer your question.
Well, I am going to test her memory right now.
We're not going to engage in a memory contest of what's in the book.
I have a right to see what if anything, Mrs. Ramsey currently remembers about the theory of the crime.
That's a different question. You're asking her about what is in the book, and
Okay.
she's entitled,
Right.
and you know she's entitled, to see something that you are referencing in the book,
Right. I'm
put it
not-
into context, and then answer your question.
Okay. Mrs. Ramsey, I'm going to withdraw the question. I'd like you to tell me what, if anything, you can remember about the theory of the crime that you may have developed over time.
Someone was in our home the night of December 25th and murdered our daughter while we slept.
Is there anything more about that theory that you remember or have developed?
Well, that's basically it. There was someone who was not a member of our family in our home that night, took JONBENET from her bed and murdered her.
With respect to that theory of the crime, is there anything else that you can remember about it?
What do you mean? Is there anything else you can
Remember
about it?
about that night, as far as it leading to developing that theory.
I'm going to have to. That's a question that is either so vague or so broad. You're asking her now to say, is there anything she can remember about that night that would lead to her developing that theory? Why don't you ask her a specific question, Darnay? That's too broad and too vague.
All right. What is it about the events of that evening and the next day that has led you to this theory of the crime?
I found a ransom note. I found my daughter missing from her bedroom, and several hours later, our daughter was found dead in our home. That's pretty clear to make one draw the conclusion that someone came into our home and murdered her.
And you don't feel it was a member of your own family? Is that correct?
No, sir.
I think your answer is really yes, sir. Is that correct? Would require a yes response so that the record is clear. Don't we agree, Darnay?
Yes, that's
It
fine.
was not a member of my family.
Okay. All right. I'm going to take just a short break because I'm going to go into another area. I just wanted to sort of like generally establish
Whatever.
this. So let's take a 1 or 2 minute break. I know
Absolutely.
people can't hop up or whatever.
If you need to,
I'm
we
gonna-
don't mind moving.
No need to. I just wanted, it's a natural break.
We can take it off the video too.
Yeah.
Maybe you could shoot that down and take it off.
We're on the video record at 9:39.
I'll leave that for later.
We're on the video record at 9:49.
Hello, Mrs. Ramsey. Okay. Lynn, I want to proceed when you're ready.
Oh, absolutely. Go right ahead.
Oh, okay. Mrs. Ramsey, I would like you to look at page 407 of the paperback edition of your book, The Death of Innocence. I've highlighted a section I'd just like you to read, which begins numeric number 4 and then the ransom note. Could you read that, please, for the record?
4. The ransom note. Considered earlier and throughout the book, the note was written by the killer and remains an extremely important clue. An adequate amount of handwriting samples from the killer should conclusively tie him to the long and rambling note.
Mrs. Ramsey, do you still agree with that statement?
I'm not sure which statement.
The statement that you just read in your book, do you still agree with it?
Well, it's my belief that whoever wrote the ransom note probably had something to do with her murder. Is that what you're asking me?
Yes, I am. I just want to know that, I know this book was written a couple of years ago, and I just want to determine whether it's still your belief, that this statement is still your belief, that you believe that this statement to be true today.
Yes, I believe that. Yes, I believe that.
Okay. Now, I'd like you to turn to page 145 of The Death of Innocence, the paperback edition of it, and I'd like you to please read out loud, starting where it's highlighted, a week and a half after the 1st of February. If you could read that, please.
A week and a half after the 1st of February, the Denver Post ran an interesting observation on the handwritten ransom note that Douglas had spoken about on Dateline. The paper said, "Leaving a handwritten document at the scene of the crime in most cases is tantamount to leaving one's calling card. Bradley and other forensic document examiners say that it's nearly impossible for a person to disguise handwriting so that an expert can't link a suspect to a document, such as the note found in the Ramsey home. The older a person is, the more automatic and difficult it becomes to conceal the clues, and the longer a document is, the harder it becomes to disguise one's writing."
Thank you. Do you agree with that statement?
For clarification, does she agree that that is what the Denver Post said, or do you ask?
No, I'm asking her, well, I'm not asking her whether that's what the Denver Post said, because they're indicating in the book that. I just want to know if she agrees. Just because the statement is in here doesn't necessarily mean she agrees with it. I'd just like, for clarification, do you agree with that statement?
Or has any idea who Bradley is, for example?
I wasn't, I'm not really concerned about whether she knows who Bradley is. I just want to know if she agrees with the statement that leaving a handwritten document at the scene of the crime, in most cases, is tantamount to leaving one's calling card. And also,
Why don't you do it one at a time?
start with that. Do you agree with that statement?
Well, I've been told that this is the ransom note of ransom notes, the longest one that people have ever seen, and that it's a lot of information for discovering someone's handwriting. So I don't know whether it's tantamount to leaving a calling card, but
I was wondering why you had put this statement in this book, if you don't agree with it.
I didn't
Well,
say I
she-
didn't agree with it.
I'm not
Except-
sure that's her statement.
Oh, okay.
Again, going back to look in context, who writes
Oh,
the
no,
This
no, I
was
understand.
something that was in the newspaper.
Yeah, I know, but it was included in the book for some purpose, and I'm assuming, reading it, and I don't want to make an assumption, but I can only assume reading it, that it's put here because you agree with the basic premise of the article, or at least the basic premise of the section that's excerpt for this.
What's the question?
Well, I just want to know if she agrees with the first sentence, leaving a handwriting document at the scene of the crime, in most cases, is tantamount to leaving one's calling card. Do you agree with that statement?
With all due respect, I
Yeah.
think she's given you an
Yes.
answer to that exact question.
Oh, okay. I wasn't certain that she had.
Let me
could
make
she-
sure, so
yeah.
that we're not, I don't want you to not get an answer.
I mean, it would be consistent with the earlier statement on page 407 about an extremely important clue.
Yeah, I thought she did answer that. She said, well, I have been told that this is the ransom note of ransom notes, the longest that people have seen, that it is a lot of information for discovering someone's handwriting, so I don't know if it is tantamount to leaving a calling card. I mean, that's what she said.
Okay, so, if she could say yes or no, it would be very helpful.
That would be, but it would only be helpful if it was the only answer she could give. I think she's entitled to give you
Okay.
her full answer, including an explanation. And I think she's told you she doesn't disagree with it, but the use of the phrase leaving a calling card, she's not in a position to comment on.
Okay.
A calling card would have been better because it would have had the person's name, address, and phone number.
Okay. I was curious as to why this had been put in the book, if you remember. Do you know why this statement was included in the book? The one that you just read, leaving a handwritten document at the scene of the crime?
Well, I don't remember exactly. It's been a couple
you
of years.
remember.
Why I don't remember exactly why we put it in there. I believe this is a section that John wrote, so you might want to ask him that.
All right. Were you ever asked to give handwriting exemplars at any time by anyone after your daughter's death?
Yes, I was.
Can you tell me who asked you to do that, not violating any attorney-client privilege?
The Boulder Police Department.
Did anyone else ask you to give handwriting exemplars beside the Boulder Police Department?
I gave several of them, but I can't. I believe it all had to do with the Boulder Police Department, whether it was the CBI
all
or.
right, but nobody other than law enforcement asked you to give them handwriting exemplars. Is that true?
I don't remember anyone else asking me.
Okay, I just want to clarify it. And do you remember how many times you were asked to give handwriting exemplars by the law enforcement people or authorities in, I'm assuming it's in Colorado?
Yes, 5 or 6, I think. Something
Okay.
like that.
In the back of the book, Appendix A, page 428, actually it's, you can identify 429, it doesn't have 428 on the upper left-hand corner. It's called A Chronicle of Cooperation. And the paragraph that's second from the bottom, there's an indicating when handwriting samples were given by John and their dates, and then Patsy, their dates, and then Burke, their dates. Would you just review that and see if that refreshes your recollection with respect to the dates? Are those dates accurate or substantially accurate? If you can remember.
I'm sure they probably are.
Okay. And I'm counting them. There's a date, December 28th, January 4th, February 28th, April 12th, and May 20th. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. It looks like 5. Is that what you remember?
That
To be the number of times?
That seems to be accurate, yes.
Okay. Were you ever given an explanation by the law enforcement authorities as to why they were asking you to come in so many times to give exemplars? Why they needed you to give exemplars over a period of like 5 different dates?
I don't remember them really saying why they needed more.
Okay. Did anyone else, without telling me what was actually said, give you a reason as to why you were being asked for so many exemplars?
Here, you're not to give him, nor do, I think he's asking you to give him any information about any discussion that you had between yourself and your attorneys. If there was any such discussion, he's not entitled to know that, and he's not asking about that.
Was there anybody else, for instance, maybe Lou Smith may have asked you, maybe somebody from Alex Hunter's office might have asked you or told you or whatever, something that's not a privileged communication between you and your attorneys, if you remember?
No, just every time they asked me to do it, I willingly gave it.
Okay. Now, I'm going to ask you about your reaction to that. Were you surprised that you were asked for so many exemplars, to come back 5 times, in fact? Were you surprised by that?
Somewhat, yes.
Were you concerned about that?
I was not concerned particularly.
Do you know if anybody at any time expressed an opinion as to whether you were the author of the ransom note that while you were doing this?
During the handwriting exemplar process?
Yeah, when you were being asked to give handwriting exemplars, did anybody in law enforcement express the opinion that they thought you were the ransom note writer?
I don't recall them ever saying that.
Do you know whether or not anybody ever expressed the opinion in front of you that John was the ransom note writer?
I never heard anyone say that.
Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is I need some, we're going to go through a little housekeeping. I'm sorry, I just have to do this for purposes of laying foundations. I'm going to ask you to mark these as exhibits for, and Lynn, I'm going to give you a copy.
Okay.
This is for identification purposes. Here, Lynn, if you want to look at that.
Is there a way to relate this to the exhibits?
What I'm going to do is basically, I would like to show these to Mrs. Ramsey at this time and ask her, one, in a foundational way, whether she recognizes what she's being shown. Can she identify it, and can she identify the handwriting?
Okay.
Okay.
These are the exhibits that are attached to the first
Yeah.
set of.
Mhm.
Do you have them by exhibit number?
No, I don't.
Correlate?
No, I don't. Right now, I'm doing it in a particular order, which doesn't relate to that. Whether these ultimately are used or not is another matter. But right now, I'd like to. Could you just mark this as Exhibit 1, please, or whoever, you want me to do it? Yeah, I'm assuming they're using A, B, C, and I'll be using 1, 2, 3. Okay. Mrs. Ramsey, I'm going to show you a document that has been marked Plaintiff's Exhibit 1 for identification. And I'd like you to look at it and take your time. And I'm going to ask you if you recognize the photograph.
And let me just say this for the record, Darnell.
Yes.
I think that you have given her an enlarged copy of what was possibly one of the exhibits to one of the reports that you filed early in the case with respect to your mandatory responses. And I think she has answered in request for admissions to her best ability whether she could decipher from those copies whether she was the author of the handwriting. To the extent that you are giving her the same exhibits but in a different form, either larger or in color versus black and white, etc. Just want to make sure that if there's any confusion down the road between her ability to try to decipher it now and what she looked at then, that might be the explanation.
Well,
and so that's why I had asked if you wanted to present her with the actual exhibits. That would,
Well, I
think, help
actually,
us
no, I want to
be
be
able
able
to look
to,
at the same thing.
I basically want her to be able to see what it is. I'm looking for content, not for
comparison with
no,
other
it's not comparison.
copies of those
Just
from
merely
other
want
sources.
her to
Okay, that's
indicate
fair.
whether she recognizes the photograph.
That's fair.
I think I've seen this photograph before.
Can you identify, without naming anybody in the photograph, can you identify any of the individuals in the photograph?
Just JONBENET.
Okay. I would like you to now look at the handwriting below the photograph. Do you recognize the handwriting?
Not particularly.
All right. Do you, so you say not particularly, you don't recognize this as being your handwriting, is that correct?
I don't remember writing it. Is that what you mean? I mean,
But-
I don't know. I may have.
All right, but do you recognize the handwriting as being your handwriting?
No.
Okay. Now, we're going to go to another exhibit. I'll leave this with you right here. Okay, now, if you could mark this Exhibit 2. Lynn, here, I'll give this to you. There we go. Thank you. Now, Mrs. Ramsey, I'd like you to examine a document that I've given you that's been labeled Plaintiff's Exhibit Number 2 for identification. And I'll ask you if you recognize any of the photographs in the document.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to ask you if you recognize any of the handwriting in the document.
Recognize it as mine or someone else's? or
Now
just-
I'll go to the next question. Do you recognize any of the handwriting as being your handwriting?
Not particularly.
So you couldn't say with any degree of certainty that that was your handwriting?
No.
All right, thank you. All right, I'm going to, Lynn, I don't know what you're doing with those. Do you need
Well, you
copies,
took
Lynn?
the last one back.
Yeah, okay, fine. Now I'm going to ask sorry about this. This is one of the more boring parts of depositions. I'm going to ask that this document be marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit 3 for identification when here.
Oh, I think we have it.
It's 2 pages.
Now, Mrs. Ramsey, I'm going to ask you to look at Plaintiff's Exhibit number 3 marked for identification and ask you whether or not you recognize this document.
Yes, I do.
What do you recognize it to be?
An entry form for the Boulder Christmas Parade.
Have you ever seen this entry form before today?
Yes.
Okay. Could you tell me when you've seen it, if you remember?
Well, I obviously saw it to fill it out.
Okay. Then that was my next question. Do you recognize the handwriting in this entry form?
Yes, I do.
Can you tell me whose handwriting you recognize it to be?
My handwriting.
So all of the handwriting on both pages is your handwriting, is that correct? I mean, no one else.
Well, this on the second page is pretty blurry, but I
Right.
believe it is mine.
Okay, so nobody at this event filled in part of it for you?
No.
Okay, you filled this in completely yourself,
Yes,
is that
I did.
correct? Thank you. Okay, now I'm going to show you another document, which I'm going to, if you don't mind, have the reporter mark as Plaintiff's Exhibit 4 for identification. Thank you. Mr. Wood, there we go. Now, Mrs. Ramsey, I'm going to ask you to look at a document that I've handed you, which has been marked Plaintiff's Exhibit number 4 for identification, and I'm going to ask you whether or not you recognize this document.
No, I don't.
Okay. I'm going to ask you if you recognize the handwriting in the document.
I recognize my signature.
Do you recognize any other written part of the document as being your handwriting?
It looks similar, but I can't say for sure.
Okay, so are you uncertain as to whether the additional handwriting is yours or not, outside of the signature?
Yeah, I'm uncertain.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'm going to ask the reporter to mark this as Plaintiff's Exhibit number 5 for identification. And now, Mrs. Ramsey, I'm going to ask you to look at a document which has been labeled Plaintiff's Exhibit number 5 for identification. And I'm going to ask you whether or not you recognize it.
Yes, I do.
What do you recognize it to be?
Looks like a greeting written on the inside of a Christmas card.
Do you remember writing a Christmas card like this?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to ask you whether or not you can identify the handwriting.
Yes, I can.
Can you tell me whose handwriting you believe it to be?
Mine.
Thank you very much. Okay. Going to ask the reporter to please mark this document, Plaintiff's Exhibit number 6 for identification. Thank you. It's 2 pages, I believe. going to ask you, Mrs. Ramsey, whether or not you can identify the document that I've handed you, which is marked Plaintiff's Exhibit Number 6 for identification.
Yes.
Can you tell me what the document is?
It's a handwritten note.
Right. Can you identify the handwriting?
Yes, it's my handwriting.
Thank you very much. Okay. Now, I'm going to ask the reporter to please mark. This is Plaintiff's Exhibit Number 7 for identification. And I'm going to hand this to Mr. Wood. Mrs. Ramsey, I'd like to know if you can identify the document, or actually the image or figure, on Plaintiff's Exhibit 7 marked for identification.
No, I can't.
Okay. I'm going to ask you to look at the handwriting and tell me if you can recognize the handwriting.
This is such a bad copy. Do you
No, I
have the
understand.
original?
No, I don't. If you can't recognize the handwriting, you can just simply say, no, you cannot.
I cannot.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to ask the court reporter to mark this document, Plaintiff's Exhibit Number 8 for identification. And Mr. Wood. I'm going to direct Mrs. Ramsey's attention to the writing that's what looks like is on a box. It says Ramsey Xmas, and then also looks like some writing on the lower right-hand side, which just says Ramsey. I'm going to ask her to look at that carefully. And I'm going to ask her, first of all, if she can identify to the best of her ability what is in this photograph.
It looks like pictures of boxes taken through a window pane.
Okay. Now I'm going to ask you if you can recognize any of the handwriting.
This lower one may be mine, but I'm not sure.
Okay. And the upper left, it says Ramsey Xmas.
I don't know.
Okay. So you don't recognize it as being your handwriting?
Not specifically, no.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Coming to the end, I'd like the reporter to mark that as Plaintiff's Exhibit Number 9 for identification. Mrs. Ramsey, I'm going to ask you, I'm not going to even try to ask you what you're looking at. I'm just going to ask you if you can see any of the handwriting in this document.
Is that an admission that nobody can even determine what the object is?
Well, the objects would be subject. One looks like a box at the lower part, but I'm not going to ask Mrs. Ramsey to determine. I'm just wondering if she can make out any of the handwriting, and if she can she, with any degree of certainty, tell me if she recognizes any of the handwriting?
It's pretty hard to tell.
Okay. You can just simply say no, or
No.
you're not certain. Okay. All right. Well,
I
thank you.
could see the original, maybe.
No, I understand. But based on this document, you're not able to
No.
determine. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, now. Okay, I'm going to ask the reporter to mark this as Plaintiff's Exhibit Number 10 for identification. Mrs. Ramsey, what I'm showing you is a series of letters, and I'm not identifying their source. I'm just simply showing you a series of letters. I'd like you to look at them carefully. Again, this is Plaintiff's Exhibit number 10 for identification. Can you, without knowing the source or where these letters are from, identify any of them?
No, sir.
Okay. Now, I'd like you to also look at the letters and ask me if you see any similarities in the way in which these letters are written. And we'll just start from the bottom, looking at the B.
What?
B.
Ask you if I see any
No, I'm
similarities?
going to ask you to comment on whether you see any similarities in the handwriting.
Well, let me just ask you, Darnay. I mean, Patsy Ramsey is not a questioned document examiner.
I just want her personal observation.
We don't know what alterations have been done to these documents. I know where these documents came from. They came from one of your experts, and I think
Well,
they're
I would prefer that you don't identify the source.
Why not?
For the purposes of
She's
this
entitled to,
demonstration.
no, we're not here to play games.
No,
She's
no,
entitled to know.
Mr.
No, let
Wood,
me finish,
no,
Darnay.
Mr.
She's
Wood,
let me finish, please.
You can't have a standing objection where you basically counsel, give information to your client in your objection, which is what
Darnay.
you're doing right now.
All right.
And I would like you to stop it.
No, no.
I have a
listen.
right to show her, for all you know, I'm trying to test her perception. You don't know what I'm doing
Her
with
perception.
this. I'm not saying that this means anything. I'm asking her to look at these letters, ask her if she recognizes any of them, and then after doing that, asking her if she can perceive any similarities in these letters. That's all, just as a layperson, her personal observation. And I have a right to do that, and I'm going to ask her to do it.
I'm not
And I
gonna-
don't have to identify this. This could be an eye chart for all you know. All right, for all you know, I'm testing her
Darnay.
perception.
Darnay, it's not an eye chart. It's a document that
No,
you...
it's not. Don't identify the document, Mr.
Are you gonna let me
Wood.
finish, Darnay?
No, not if you're going to identify things.
well,
Not
let's
if you're
take a
going
break.
to
Let's
have
take
a standing
break.
objection.
Yeah, we're going to take
Okay.
a break now, and then
All right.
I'll come back, and when I get a chance to make my statement on the record, to perfect the record, we'll start again. But if you're not going to give me that fundamental right, then we're not going to start again,
Well,
Darnay.
well-
Do you understand me? Because you're not the judge.
If you want to
and you're not
stop,
gonna- let
if
me
you want to
finish.
stop the deposition, all right. Well,
If
first
you
of all,
don't stop interrupting me, we're going to have to stop.
I have to
because-
interrupt you if you are in fact going to give your client information that you're not supposed to give your client while I'm asking her a specific question, which is what you're trying to do right now, at least
No,
in my
I'm not,
opinion. Yes,
Darnay.
you are.
You
You're trying
don't
to
know what I'm
identify.
trying to do
I know what
because you
you're
won't
doing.
let me
You're
do it.
trying to identify the source of this, and I don't want you to do that for the purposes of this a question.
We're going to take a break
Wow.
now, and when I have the ability to make my record without interruption and instruction
I'd like you to
from
make the colloquy
you're
without
just not
your.
going to stop interrupting, are you?
I'm not going to let you basically give your client information
Darnay.
in a standing
Darnay,
objection.
if I make a statement on the record that is inappropriate, you may take that up with Judge Carnes, and Judge Carnes can determine whether I have inappropriately instructed my client through an objection. But you are not the judge, and you're not going to make that decision today. You have the right to say what you want to on this record. I have that right also. So, when you decide that we're going to play on that level playing field, let's get started again. But you're not going to sit here and be the judge and tell me what I am going to do or not do, whether you like it or agree with it or not.
Now, Mr.
So
Wood-
we're now going to go off
right,
the
now-
record and take a break.
Now, Mr. Wood, for the purposes of before we go off the record and take a break, I foresaw this as a possible stumbling block or speed bump. And as a result, Evan Altman was kind enough to call Judge Carnes' office, and she is willing, in a phone call, to make an immediate ruling on whether or not what I'm asking Mrs. Ramsey to do is proper and whether or not your objection is proper. She is in her office. She is available for an immediate conference.
I have not been allowed to make my statement. And if we want to address with Judge Carnes at
Yes.
this point, excuse me, if the issue to be addressed with Judge Carnes is whether I'm allowed to make an objection without interruption from you, then I will be happy to take that up with Judge Carnes. If we're going to take up an objection of mine with Judge Carnes, I think I fairly ought to have the right to state it on the record.
No, but I would like you to make the statement to Judge Carnes before you make a statement in front of your client on the record basically notifying your client of precisely what it is that I'm doing with respect to this, which I don't
know
want
what
you to
you're
do.
doing with this.
Well, yes.
I'm not trying to make
All
a
right.
representation
well,
of that.
Let's talk to Judge Carnes, because we went to enough trouble to establish, to call her office yesterday and see if she was available for a conference, because I foresaw this problem precisely coming up.
I yet to understand what you want to take up with Judge Carnes.
Well, let's call her. I'll tell her. Quite frankly, I'm going to ask her whether or not, I'm going to have you state your objection that you're going to give on the record to her on the phone, and we're going to find out whether or not she thinks it's proper for you to make that objection. And then if she rules that it is proper to make it in that form, you can make it in that form.
So you want me to state my objection for the first time on the phone with Judge Carnes? So
That's
you're going to call Judge
because
Carnes to, excuse me, you're going to call Judge Carnes to address with her an objection that you think is inappropriate that I haven't even been allowed to make yet?
No, you started to make it, and it was clear from your making it what you were trying to do, which is basically make the equivalent of a standing. You're trying to give your client information improperly in order to influence her answer. That
is just
fine.
Pure bunk, Darnay.
Well, sorry, that's what I see it to be. That's why we have Judge Carnes waiting by the phone for this.
If you have an issue to take up with Judge Carnes, you have the right to do whatever you want to do. I don't have an issue with Judge Carnes yet.
Well, you may have it if you don't get on the phone with us and talk
I'm going to
her.
participate. I'm not going to allow you to ex parte a conversation
Well,
with Judge Carnes.
she
and
wouldn't
I'll be
allow it
glad to-
either. No judge would allow an ex parte communication. You know better than
Why don't
that.
we define so that we can
Okay.
read the record to her exactly what the controversy is at the moment? Because I still don't understand it, because I haven't
All
been
right.
allowed to state an objection. I may not even
Well,
have an objection.
in fact, I'd like you to read back what you were about to state as an objection, in fact.
Okay. I started off and said, you said the question to Ms. Ramsey, I'm going to ask you to comment on whether you see any similarities in the handwriting, and that's on this exhibit number 10, without identifying it for her. And I said, let me just ask you, Darnay, Patsy Ramsey is not a questioned document examiner, Mr. Hoffman. I just want her personal observation. Mr. Wood, we don't know what alterations have been done to these documents. I know where these documents came from. They came from one of your experts, Mr. Hoffman.
That's the point
Wait
at
a
which
second.
that's
Mr.
the
Hoffman,
point at which you're starting to give her
excuse
information.
me, Mr. Hoffman, I would prefer you don't identify the source. Mr. Wood, why not? She is entitled to, and then you interrupted, and I don't think we
This
ever
is
got
the
any
area
further.
that
so
we
the
have
question
our
is whether or
conundrum.
not, when you give her a document, is she entitled to know the source of the document before she answers questions about it?
No.
Let's put that issue before Judge Carnes.
Okay. Yep.
Video
And we're going to read that statement. That's what I'm objecting to, what you're doing there. So that we'll read that to Judge Carnes.
I think I understand what we want to
Okay.
do with Judge Carnes. And
All
that's
right,
to ask
let's
her
do
whether
it.
when you question her about a document, she's entitled to know
No, a
what the
particular
document
type
is.
of document. Okay, not
She's
all
entitled to know what the
documents.
document is.
Raw video record. Well, the video record at 10:33.
Okay. Mrs. Ramsey, I'm going to show you a document that's been marked Plaintiff's Exhibit 10 for identification. And I'd like you to look at the document. Please look at it carefully. This document, for the record, contains 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 letters that are side by side, vertically on the page. The letter D, what looks like the letter S, what looks like letters R and O, what looks like an N, what looks like an O, what looks like an exclamation point, what looks like a G, and what looks like a B. Now I'm going to ask you, Mrs. Ramsey, if you can identify any of these letters as being your handwriting.
No, sir.
Okay. Now I'm going to ask you to look at these letters and tell me, in fact, I withdraw the question. I'd like you to look at the lower letter B, what looks like it could be a letter B at the bottom.
Left or right, there's a mark with
Yeah.
some sort of a funny mark
Yeah.
over it.
yeah, looks like a little hat. Those letters, for the purposes of this discussion, look like they might be the letter B. I'm going to ask you whether you see any similarity in the two letters. Any visual similarity? You as a layperson, not as an expert, just looking at it visually, do you see any similarities?
And if I might have my objection.
Sure,
to
at
the
this
record,
point, please.
Simply that I object to the form of the question. I do not believe it's appropriate to ask a layperson a question that goes to what you might believe to be a question document issue from an expert, particularly when you have not identified the source of the writings before the witness. You have not identified and answered whether these documents have been in any way altered, blown up, enlarged, positioned differently. So I object to the form of the question for those reasons.
All right, and
May I
also,
answer the question, Mrs.
also for the
Ramsey?
purposes, I'd just like to state that this answer would not be used for any evidentiary purpose, realizing that there's no proper foundation as to source, as to how these letters came to be what they are. But I will just say one thing for the record, that lay people are, under Article 9 of the Federal Rules of Evidence, are occasionally allowed to identify handwriting as lay people. Frequently letters are shown to lay people, and they are allowed to authenticate handwriting to that degree if they have familiarity, which is one of the reasons why I asked you if you were familiar with any of the letters. Now,
And I did not object when you asked her whether she believed that to be her handwriting.
right, and that's all I'm
But
asking.
now you're asking her
No, I'm not
about
gonna
whether
ask her
there's
that.
similarity, and from a lay perspective, and I will accept your stipulation that you will not use that answer for any evidentiary purpose. And with that stipulation, you may answer the question.
I'd like you to look at the letter B and tell me if those B's look at all similar to you.
Well, they're both lowercase b's.
Is there anything about the B's that to you look similar, beside the fact that they're lowercase, the way they're drawn?
No, not particularly.
Okay, I'm going to ask you then to look to the letter above the letter that we've identified as B, and what looks like it could be a G. And I'm going to ask you to look at the G. And I'm going to ask you whether or not you see any similarities between the G's and what those similarities are.
Same stipulation.
Same stipulation.
Well, they're both lowercase g. They're both more the same size than the b's are.
Is there anything, what about the way in which what looks like what could be described as a tail with the G? Is there any similarity with respect to that?
It swings to the left.
Right. Do they look similar, the tails, to the G?
Somewhat. I mean, it's
Just
a
a-
G. You make a G with the tail to the left.
Okay.
Is that what you mean?
Those look similar, like similar tails.
You're talking about.
And the G.
Well, I
again,
mean,
think
one's
she answered your question.
squiggly, one's squiggly, and one is smoother.
Okay.
But I mean, depends on how many things you want to.
Just looking for whatever points of similarity that you, as a
I would say they're
layperson,
most
could say.
similar in
Or
size,
dissimilarity,
or
in
they're.
fairness.
All right, and dissimilar. You can just simply make whatever visual observations you want about it. I just simply want your reaction.
The one
to
on the
each-
right is more shaky. It looks like
And what about the one on the left?
it's not as shaky, and the one on the right has a little swoop up on the tail, and the one on the left does not.
Right.
The one on the left has a thicker circle of part of the G, and the one on the right.
Now, I'm going to ask you before I withdraw that question, do you have any other observations, similarities or dissimilarities that you'd like to express?
No.
All right, I'm going to ask you to look to what looks like explanation points, and I'm going to ask you if you see any points of similarity or dissimilarity. between
Same
the two.
stipulation.
Same stipulation.
Thank you.
Well, one's thick, one's thin, one has a bigger dot than the other. That's fat, that's...
Anything
little.
about the
This-
slope or angle or anything else that's similar or dissimilar?
I don't know what slope or angle means.
Oh, the way in which it's going up and down.
Well, that's how you make an exclamation point,
Right.
is straight down with a
Right.
dot under it.
Okay. Do they look similar or dissimilar with respect to how vertical they are?
Well, the one on the left is squigglier and leans at the top a little bit.
All right. I'm going to, any other similarities or dissimilarities before I move to the next one?
I don't think they look alike.
Okay. The next objects or letters look like they might be O's, the letter O. Or they could be a 0 from a number, but in any case, a 0 or an O.
Or it could be even an attempt to make a Q.
Could be, but you can identify it any way you like, Mrs. Ramsey, and please point out any similarities or dissimilarities that you see, and Mr. Wood, the same stipulation.
Thank you.
I don't think they look a thing alike.
All right. So you'd say that they're just dissimilar. Could you point out their dissimilarities?
The dissimilarities, one is
dissimilarities.
large, one is small, one is really heavy and feathered, kind of, and one is smoother.
All right. Any other similarities or dissimilarities before I move on that you'd like to
They both
make
have
us-
an opening in the middle.
Right, the hole in the donut.
Yeah.
I'd like you just to look up to the next letter. Now that could be an N, could be a truncated R, hard to say. I'd like you to look at that and just tell me what similarities or dissimilarities you see between the two letters.
Could be an M too.
It looks like a
Could be
pie.
anything. Yeah, could be, you know, for all we know, it's a little horse or something that's truncated, or poodle, actually.
A poodle?
One of those
Ooh, this-
show poodles.
I'm not seeing the poodle here.
Is this
Arnett.
psych
Well,
test?
this
or-
is right, a Rorschach
Yeah.
for attorneys. If you could look at that, those two letters, and with the same, Lynn, what is it, the same stip?
Same stip.
Stip.
One's shorter than the other one. The one on the right shorter than the one on the left. The one on the left has like a little triangle thing over top of it.
I just want to draw your attention to the fact that they seem to merge. There seems to be, whatever it is, it seems like one thing is running into another, or there's something hanging off it. It could be, it's an awkward looking letter. It could be an R and an O. It could be any number of other configurations.
Which one are you are you looking at this one?
Oh no, I'm sorry. Are we still at the poodle? I thought we were going to move on after the poodle.
I thought we were still at the poodle.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I never saw a poodle, for the record.
All right.
Neither did I. That's why I'm staying
Fine.
there. Viewers.
You're not going to go there,
Get
Lynn, right?
credit for
All right.
talking about something.
Oh, so you're at the third one down
Before
now?
I finish that, I just want to give you the opportunity. Do you have any other observations of similarity or dissimilarity?
Of the
with
little
respect-
pie one?
Yeah, the little pie.
No.
Okay. Now.
I mean pi like a Greek letter
Yes,
pi. You know.
exactly.
Pi r square.
Right. Now we'll move to the next configuration,
Okay.
and whatever that is. I see it as an R and an O, but that's just the way I look at it. I'd like you to tell me what you see and similarities and dissimilarities between the lettering.
Same stip.
Same step.
What? That doesn't look like anything in the alphabet that I've ever seen. I mean, it doesn't look like a letter to me.
All right. Fair enough. Okay, so any specific dissimilarities, except that it just doesn't look like a letter between the two non-letter
Well, the one on the
looking-
right seems to be heavier and has a little piece sticking out from the left side, and the one on the left has a little bird over top of it or something, mark. And
All right.
it looks like they were made with different weights of a pencil or something.
If you have no further observations, we'll move to the next lettering. What looks like could be an S.
Or it looks like it could be a 5.
Okay,
without the
could be a
top.
5 too. Any similarities or dissimilarities between the two?
The one on the left is larger than the one on the right.
Mhm.
The one on the right looks more like an S than the one on the left. The one on the left is more circular, kind of, on the bottom.
Mhm.
Then the one on the right is, the bottom portion looks more angular, sort of.
We have the same stip on the
Same
side.
stipulation. Any other observations of either similarities or dissimilarities before I move on, Mrs. Ramsey?
No.
I'll ask you to look at the top and final one. What I would identify as a D, but that doesn't mean it is a D. I'd like you to look at that and tell me what similarities or dissimilarities that you see there. And Lynn, of course, we have the same stip.
The left one looks like an A to me, and the right one looks like a D. It looks like maybe a shaky or older person might have written
Right.
it. 'Cause it's kind of squiggly. This one has a higher, the one on the right has a higher stick on the side than the one on the left.
Right.
And the open space, the donut hole is bigger on the one on the right than the left. But I don't think they looked alike.
All right. Fair enough.
And they're
And
like two different letters to me.
thank you for putting up with that exercise. And Mr. Wood, thank you also. Okay. Okay. You remember earlier we had I had you read about the handwriting from your book, and I would say that maybe we both concede that the handwriting is an important part of the evidence in this crime.
She can speak for herself, but
Right.
we're not going to have her speaking.
All right,
for
no,
you.
I'm sorry.
No concessions. were
No,
one thing.
okay.
She's answered your questions about
Yeah.
that and with respect
Okay.
to her beliefs.
I'm just using that foundationally
That's okay.
to
Just wanna make
move
sure.
on so that there's no question as to why I'm moving into a particular area. And it goes to the issue of why Mr. Wolf is here in this lawsuit with respect to some elements of it. Why in the complaint there is what may appear to you to be an extremely unfair accusation or representation of you as author of the ransom note, as the person who killed her daughter or whatever. And a lot of this is to try and determine the degree to which the handwriting experts that Mr. Wolf is using in this case can accurately determine whether you are in fact the author of the ransom note or not, which is part of why we've been doing this. I just want to show you something that is, I just want you to look at it, and it, again, is why, so to speak, why, I would like you to mark this for Plaintiff's Exhibit 11, and I'm going to show this. Now, I'm not making any representations in this document as to whether, in fact, its submission means anything other than this was prepared by two handwriting experts. This document is not being submitted to prove the truth of anything in the document. So if you could mark that, and Lynn will stipulate to that effect. Would you mark this document as Plaintiff's Exhibit 11? Now, Mrs. Ramsey, I'm going to tell you that that document, along with reports, handwriting reports, were prepared by document examiners Sina Wong and David Liebman. And other handwriting was other handwriting was used in the form of the police exemplars that were given to my office by Mr. Wood pursuant to discovery request. And those documents are, without a doubt, your handwriting because they were identified by Mr. Wood as being the handwriting exemplars that you personally gave to law enforcement in Colorado at their request during that 5-day period. Now, the problem for Mr. Wolf in this case is the fact that not one of the experts, Sina Wong, David Liebman, an expert known as Gideon Epstein, Larry F. Ziegler, and an expert known as Donald Lacey, have all identified you as the ransom note writer. There's no, it's not a close call as far as they're concerned. They have identified you. One of them, in fact, said, without doubt, you are the author of the ransom note. So in order to be certain that they are, in fact, correct in what they are looking at as examples of your handwriting, I wanted you to look at some of the documents that I gave you. And now I want you to look at the document there and see why, in fact, the issue of your authorship is such a problem.
You have a question?
Yes.
Let's ask the question.
Okay. Mrs. Ramsey, did you write the ransom note?
And before you answer that, I want to object to the form of the question, and I want to specifically object to each and every one of the prefatory comments with respect to that question, which started off a long time ago, where you said to move on so there was no question why I'm moving into a particular area. By Mr. Hoffman, it goes to the issue of why Mr. Wolf is here in this lawsuit, beginning at that point, down through and including everything except for your stipulation, which we will accept. I want to move to strike all of the prefatory comments from that beginning down through where you said and ended. Now I want you to look at the document there and see why, in fact, this, the question of your authorship, I believe, is a problem. All of those are improper as to form. I move to strike each and every one of them with the exception of your stipulation. I also want to tell you that I was very courteous in letting you sit here and in effect lecture my client. That is your one and only lecture, Mr. Hoffman. You are here to ask questions. Now, your question, as I understand it, if you'd like to restate it, is did Patsy Ramsey write the ransom note? Is that the question?
Yes, it is.
Why don't you restate that? Because I think the other question isn't worth the paper it's written on or the time you've taken up to ask it, because it's totally improper as to its form.
All right. First
Now,
of all,
ask her a question.
First of all, I'm going to respond to your ad hominem attack.
It's not an ad hominem attack.
It's an ad hominem attack, and it's done for the purposes of grandstanding, which, you know, seems to be the way you're operating.
Take that up with Judge Carnes. Why don't you just ask a question?
No, I'm going to respond to your ad hominem colloquy, which was in effect an attack on me. I was not lecturing Mrs. Ramsey, and Mrs. Ramsey, I apologize if I, in fact...
You don't have to respond to that.
I'm
Do
not
you have a
asking her to
question, Mr.
respond
Hoffman?
to it. No, Mr. Wood, I'm going to respond to your ad hominem attack, which is what I consider it to be. Fact is, I was not lecturing Mrs. Ramsey. I was explaining to Mrs. Ramsey, prefatory to asking her a question which could be regarded as very insensitive, which is simply, did you write the ransom note, as to why I was asking that question. And quite frankly, I don't think it was improper of me to show a certain sensitivity to a mother whose daughter has died rather brutally.
Darnay, you have not shown this family any sensitivity since March of 1997. Now, let me
That's
stop you here. No,
that's
sir.
not before.
No, sir, let me stop you here. I am not going to sit here and have you go back and forth and talk with my client or lecture my client. You are here under the federal rules of civil procedure to ask questions.
Yes.
I have the right to make an objection. If you deem my objection to be an ad hominem attack, take it up with Judge Carnes. I believe that my objection is 100% good. Now, ask a question, let's get answers, and let's move on. We don't need the back and forth every time I make an objection. Okay?
Well,
Please, let's get going.
You're responsible for some degree for the back and forth. Quite frankly, under the federal rules, I don't think you have the right to interfere and try to control my deposition.
I have the right to make an objection.
Yeah,
I did make an objection, and
but
I
not
asked
as
you
an
to state your
attack on
question.
counsel, which is what, in fact, this was. This was an ad hominem attack. You characterized what I was doing with your client as lecturing her.
I think the
as
record
showing
will
a
speak
lack
for
of,
itself.
and also I think that you spoke outside of anything that was going on here, which was to conduct that you consider to be improper on my part outside of this deposition.
I don't know what you're talking about.
You just
now.
made a reference. You can read it right back to my lack of sensitivity
when
to
you sit
Ramsey
here and-
family in general.
You're the one making
I'm
representations
talking
on the record
about
being
why.
concerned.
No, I'm not
John A.
making representations.
You're
I'm
wasting
explaining.
all of our time now,
No,
John A.
this is my time. Okay, this is my
you wanna
deposition
waste it-
time, and I'm going to make a record responding to your ad hominem attack on counsel.
Why don't you go ahead and
Okay.
make that record?
I've
When
just
you're
been
through,
making it. I've
she'll
been
come
making
back
it.
and she'll answer questions. You don't have to sit here and listen to this, Mrs.
If
Ramsey.
she doesn't want to, that's
Yeah,
fine.
you don't have to. You can take a break and you can go ahead and make your response. And then
What-
when you have a
whatever-
question, we'll
whatever-
bring her back in here and we'll answer all your questions
All
that
right,
are
well-
properly formed.
Okay, now, all right, what we'll do is this. I'm going to ask Mrs. Ramsey a very simple question.
Thank you.
Mrs. Ramsey, did you write the ransom note that was discovered by yourself on December 26, 1996 at your home?
No, sir, I did not.
Okay, thank you. Now, at this point, I think we'll take a break. I think this would be an appropriate time to take a break. Thank you.
We're on video record at 10:55. We're on video record at 11:07.
Okay. At this point, I'd like to move on to another topic area, but just for the purposes of making a record, Mr. Wood, earlier in the deposition, said that he was going to object to, or asked to strike statements that I had made prefatory to a question that I asked Mrs. Ramsey concerning the authorship of the ransom note. And just for the record, I object to any attempt to have that stricken from the record. And that's all I want to say with respect to that. Mr. Wood, if you want to add anything to that.
Next question.
Okay. Now I'm just going to go into, I'm going to ask for some clarification of things that are in the book, things that I didn't understand. I'm going to turn your attention to page 378. It's chapter, in fact, I can let you look at that. There are two statements there. In fact, Mrs. Ramsey, if you'll just give me your book, I'll just quickly highlight it. I'm sorry about not having done this beforehand. Okay. All right. Okay. I'd like you to read the highlighted portions of, on page 378 in your book, The Death of Innocence. That's the paperback edition.
The Boulder grand jury said no to an indictment.
And then the next statement that I've highlighted.
The grand jury's secret decision.
Do you have any personal knowledge as to whether or not the grand jury did, in fact, make a decision based on that statement?
Well, the district attorney, I believe, made a public statement that said there would not be an indictment.
Okay. But there's a reference here to the grand jury's secret decision.
Why?
Do you have any knowledge of a secret decision by the grand jury? Any personal knowledge? Are you referring to that?
Well, I think all of the grand jury information is under wraps or under seal or something.
Okay, so, but do you know whether or not the grand jury, in fact, made a decision in your case?
Just going from what the district attorney said, that there was no indictment.
Okay. But this doesn't indicate, the reason I'm asking you this question is that, all right, I'll withdraw. Is it Patrick Furman? Was he an attorney of yours at one point?
Yes, he was.
Okay. Were you aware that Mr. Furman made a statement that was published in the Boulder papers to the effect that there was a rumor that the grand jury had taken a straw poll and had decided not to indict?
Object to the form of the question.
Okay.
In that I think you've inadvertently perhaps made reference to the wrong lawyer.
All right.
But if you have a statement to show
no.
her, that might be helpful.
Let's do. I don't have that statement. I'm just asking her if she's heard that.
I am not aware of a statement by Mr. Furman
Or
in the paper.
then I'll ask you by any of your attorneys
No, I'm not.
to the effect that the grand jury, that there was a rumor that the grand jury had taken a secret straw poll and had decided or voted not to indict.
Talking about public statements, not anything the attorney said to,
No,
may have
no,
said
no
to
attorney,
her.
I don't want you to
That's
to
fair.
reveal anything that is an
No, I'm
attorney
not
client.
aware of such a statement.
Okay, because, all right. So the statement, the grand jury secret decision, is not referring to any personal knowledge that you have about what went on in the grand jury room with respect to any decision to indict or not indict, is that correct?
I think that adjective was used just referring to the grand jury as a whole does everything behind closed doors.
Okay. All right, so it's just a figure of speech, is that correct?
Actually, I did not write this section.
Oh, okay.
John wrote this. So you
The-
might want to ask him this
All right,
question.
very good. Thank you very much. All right, now, there's an incident in the book on page 191, which you might remember. It's fairly lengthy, and I just want you to review it. I'm not asking you to read it. It involves the alarm system that apparently failed, and when you came home, I think you were in your home in Charlevoix, was that it? And it's the next to last paragraph on 191. If you could just look at that, just to refresh your memory generally.
Where it says John put in an alarm
Oh, the system, yeah.
And you can read any that you need to put that
Yeah,
in
just-
context.
Okay.
Do you remember that incident?
About putting the alarm system in?
No, but that incident where, no, your feelings with respect to security and whatever. It's not an incident. I'm going to refer to another part of the book in a minute. I'm just simply your state of mind and security systems.
I guess I'm unclear about what you're asking.
All right, what I'm going to ask you is this. What, do you know whether or not the, first of all, when you were living in Boulder at the time of the death of your daughter, did you have a security system in your home?
Yes, we did.
Yeah. Was that a security system that you used at the time you went out that night, December 25th, as you explain it in your book when you went out visiting people? Did you have the security alarm on that night?
No, we did not.
Okay. When you moved to Atlanta, did you install a security system in your homes, any of them?
Yes, we did.
Okay. Did you have a security system in the home that's been identified as the Atlanta, not mansion, but I don't have the address, the house where John was assaulted in May of I think it was 2001? Did you have do you know if there was a security alarm in that facility, that home in Atlanta?
There was, when we moved in, we installed a very elaborate security system. Then subsequent to that, we had some extensive remodeling done,
Right.
and the security system was dismantled and was subsequently reinstalled.
Who was in charge of in Boulder with turning the security system on or off? Was that you or was that John? Normally,
We normally did not use the security system in Boulder
and why was that?
because we felt safe in Boulder.
In Atlanta, I believe the security system was not on when John was assaulted. Do you know if that was true or not?
I don't believe that it was on.
Right. Do you know why it wasn't on?
I don't know why it wasn't on.
Were you concerned that it hadn't been left on? And
You
that your
assume it
husband-
was not dismantled at that time?
Well, yeah, actually, I ought to go back to that because you did mention dismantlement. I'm sorry.
And
Thank
I'm
you.
giving you, I'm trying to be lenient with you. We've had a few back and forth during it, but I had a lot of trouble understanding what this has to do with Chris Wolf and the allegations in his claim or the defenses to this case.
Okay. do you want me to explain?
If you feel like you need to, it might be helpful.
All right, fine. Oftentimes, a jury or a trier of fact, as the case may be, is allowed to consider something other than forensic evidence in determining whether somebody is involved in a crime or not, or just in any event. And sometimes it's the demeanor of the witness on the stand, whether a witness is in fact telling the truth or not telling the truth, or whether there's inconsistencies in the story which are such that a jury would have a right to draw what we call an inference, and from that inference what we call consciousness of guilt. So the theory is that if a person is thought to be not telling the truth, or simply his story is so implausible or inconsistent that it indicates that there is a consciousness of guilt, which a jury can use, at least in a criminal case, to determine guilt or innocence. Can be an element in it. I hope I'm stating the law correctly. And that is one of the areas that I'm going into in the deposition for the purpose. Depositions, from what I understand, Lynn, from the federal rules, allow you to go into areas where you might be able to impeach a witness later on. And so sometimes the questions don't appear to be relevant except for the impeachment purposes. So that's one of the reasons why I'm going into this area.
Well, I'm not going to make a statement about whether I agree or disagree with your statement of the law. It's your right to make that statement. I understand impeachment. I understand that it has to go to a relevant and material issue. I have grave doubts about whether an incident in 2001 that occurred in the Ramsey's home here, where Mr. Ramsey was assaulted when he got in and found someone that had broken in and stolen a number of items from his home, has anything whatsoever to do from a relevancy standpoint or from an impeachment standpoint with the issues raised in Chris Wolf's libel lawsuit. But I'm going to let her answer the question because I don't think, it's one of those things that we don't need to come back and do later.
Okay.
You can get the answer,
All right.
but I just think that, if you
can-
just keep in mind that I think you're pushing the envelope here, if
All
not
right.
going beyond it.
For the purposes, in case you raise an objection, I'll just simply explain just
I'm
very
going to let her answer it, and you
all right,
do what
briefly
you got to do.
why I'm doing this, and what it is about the security system that I find intriguing in this case. And it's the fact that there were concerns expressed in the book about the security of the Ramsey family, and the fact that the Ramsey family felt insecure. And naturally, one of the areas that you would think would concern a family is the fact that a night when their daughter had been murdered, the security system had not been working. And if there was any...
I believe in the book.
No.
No, hold on.
Sorry.
This is where we don't need to go.
Okay.
The security system was not turned on. And I think if you are familiar with the book, they made it very clear why they didn't use it in Boulder.
Right.
The point is, you're asking about an incident that occurred, you say, in 2001, where Mr. Ramsey came home while his house was under renovation with construction workers there and found someone in his home stealing items, and there was a physical altercation. And you're asking about the security system here in 2001. And I'm just simply letting you know, Darnay, I'm going to let her answer questions about that. But I think you are over the line on relevancy to the claims and defenses in this case. But I'm trying to be lenient because I want you to have the opportunity to push the envelope out. But I would just ask you to keep in mind that we are stretching this, in my view. And I would ask you just,
I'm trying to
no
enlarge...
explanations are needed.
No,
Your
no,
theory
no,
of the case
no,
is
no.
not needed. Just ask the
Fact is,
question. I'm going to let her
envelope,
answer.
I'm just trying to enlarge the envelope so that you see that the envelope isn't
Well,
being stretched.
The envelope to be enlarged is supposed to be under the rules by you making a showing of good cause and
That's
getting
what
a
I'm
court
trying
order.
to do. I'm
that
trying
before.
trying to prevent you from having
I'm letting her
to
answer it.
go in front of it. Okay.
Just ask the question.
All right. Mrs. Ramsey, were you at all concerned the fact that your husband was attacked in your Atlanta home? I don't know if you have one or two. Atlanta home, and the security system had not been turned on?
I object to the form of the question.
Okay.
You may answer the question.
I was concerned when I learned that my husband had been physically attacked. Yes.
Were you concerned that the alarm system had not been turned on?
I did not know. I was not at the home when all this happened, so I didn't know whether the alarm system was on or not.
Okay. Do you know, were you told by anyone if the alarm system was or wasn't on at the time of Mr. Ramsey's assault?
I don't believe that it was on.
Okay.
You'd have to ask him that.
All right. But that's your belief, is that correct?
Yes.
All right.
It was midday.
Yeah. There was also, I believe, in your book you described an incident where you came back to your home in Charlevoix and everyone was waiting in front of the house because I think Mr. Ramsey, in fact, describes this incident.
What page?
I don't know if I marked that. What I may have to do is go back to this question after lunch because I think that this may be one page that I didn't mark, and I'll go back to it. But I was just going to ask her if she recalled that particular event without having to reference it to the book. If she needs to
Which
look at the
event
book.
is that?
In Charlevoix, there, I believe, is an incident that you recount where something happened to the alarm system, and I believe you and your mother and maybe other members of your family were waiting nervously outside for the alarm system people to arrive, and they didn't, and I believe John went looking through the, I believe it's the Charlevoix home, to see if there was an intruder, and I was just curious as to how that alarm system had failed. That's curious as